Good morning. Today is Tuesday. It's Yud Gimel Shvat. Tafshin Ayin Daled. Who's your outside this today? Rabbi Tzarivka? Rabbi Tzishtan Asara? Tafshin Ayin Daled. We are in Sefer Mamarim. Teres Menachem Sefer Mamarim. Tafshin Yud Aleph. Tafshin Yud Beis. We just began the Mamar Sihiye Meshakeiloh. Shabbos Pashas Mishpatim, Tafshin Yud Beis. We are on page Reish Yud Daled at the bottom. 5 lines from the bottom of the page. The line starts Azai. We're at the full stop at the word Vahatnai. The Rebbe began by addressing the pasuk, "There shall not be a miscarrying and barren woman in your land. I will fill the days of your life." The Rebbe explained that the psukim here, this pasuk and the preceding pasuk, refer to blessings in Bana Chaya Mezona, children, life, and sustenance, and that they will be in abundance. And the Rebbe explained that Lo Sihiye, there shall not be, could be interpreted in 2 ways. There shall not be, but it could be a commandment, right? And the other one is a promise. Obviously, the simple definition of the pasuk is that it's a promise. If you serve Hashem, Hashem will bless you, and there will not be a Meshakeiloh v'akara. However, it's also an instruction that a person needs to do what he can to ensure that there is no miscarrying or barren woman in your land. Obviously, we have to understand what that means in the spiritual sense. So the Rebbe, this is where we stopped. And if we do what is incumbent on us, with Morgan, if we do what is incumbent on us, that we shouldn't miscarry and we should not be barren, then the Eibishter promises that He will do what He can to assist us and to bless us in that way. However, there is a condition. This is conditional. That's where we're up to. But Naila calls 5 lines from the bottom. The line begins with the word Azai at the full stop, Vahatnai. But Naila calls and the condition for all of this is Kvishamakdim Bakosov, as the verse prefaces, as is prefaced within the verse. Vahatnai. The condition for all of this is conditional upon the fact that that which is prefaced in the pasuk, in the verse, and you shall serve the Hashem your God. And then, if we do that, then Hashem will bless us in Bana Chaya Mezona, in the spheres of children, sustenance, and health. Says the Rebbe, the Av shebenegei leBana Chaya Mezona, Amru Chazal, shelav b'schus atalya milsa, el b'mazdal atalya milsa. Although concerning matters relating to children, sustenance, children, life, and sustenance, our sages say in the Talmud that these things do not depend on merit, but rather they depend on mazel, which means destiny or fate, or luck, destiny, right? In other words, it's how Hashem determines it, right? And as Chassidus explains, what's the idea of mazel? Bechinas, a mazel, mazel is such a level, it's such a level of getlachkeit, of divine energy, of divine bestowal, that merits don't reach there. It's beyond everything. It's beyond the reach of an individual in his own capacity. It's something which is bestowed upon from above. So why are we saying here that there is a condition to the blessing that Hashem will give in the spheres of Bana Chaya Mezona, children, life, and sustenance? Doesn't depend on, it would seem from the Talmud, that it doesn't depend on what? On the schus of the person, the merits of the person, but rather it's something that is bestowed from above. The Gemara over there particularly says, concerning Bana Chaya Mezona, this is the expression of the Gemara, that these things do not depend on person's merit, but rather on mazel. And it brings an example from two sages, Rav Chisda and Rabba. So the Gemara says both of them were sages, great sages. Both of them were great tzaddikim, to the extent that when they prayed for rain came. And yet we find that Rav Chisda lived 92 years, and Rabba lived 40 years. Rav Chisda, in his home, there were 60 weddings, and in Rabba's home there were 60 funerals. And some interpreters mean specifically 60, it means a lot. In Rav Chisda's home, they ate bread from the finest white flour, and they even served it to the dogs. And there was so much abundance. In Rabba's home, they barely had flour from barley for humans. So we find that notwithstanding the fact that they were both great tzaddikim, one had blessing in all three spheres, the other one unfortunately did not. So that's the question. Why are you saying over here that what? That it's conditional on serving Hashem? Mikol Mokim says the Rebbe, nonetheless, the abundance of blessing, yes, indeed. Concerning the blessing itself in these three spheres, that's predetermined by Hashem for reasons known to Him. However, abundance of blessing within these three spheres, that depends on serving Hashem specifically. Be that as it may, the bottom line is, we see that serving Hashem, man's service of Hashem, is meaningful in some way, as we've seen from these verses. So we come now to the question that the Rebbe asks, which is the core issue that this Mamar addresses, top of page Reish Tesvav, B'tzarech Lahavin, we need to understand, Mahu Inyan Ha'avodah. What is this concept, what is this idea of serving Hashem? Shal Zeh Namar, concerning which it says, V'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem, you should serve Hashem your God. What's the problem? It would seem the general concept of a servant serving his master, it would seem that this is only meaningful concerning, it's only possible concerning a slave, a servant, and a master down below, a physical servant and slave. A physical servant and master. Why? What does the embedded within the concept of service means that there's a service that I provide to someone who needs that service. In other words, without the provision of that service, the one that's receiving the service is lacking something. And there's something that, probably not allowed to say that, because I think in Allah it says that when you learn Torah you shouldn't think because it's Bittul Torah, but nonetheless, it's Tzugizont anyway. So,
you can't give a bracha if you learn Torah.
If it's Bittul Torah.
You take away from Torah.
Anyway, zu gesund. So, it doesn't mean to say chas v'shalom that when you're learning and you don't get the bracha, you don't have the bracha. It means that you get the bracha through the learning of the Torah. Anyway, so the general idea of service means that there's a service that one provides to the other, which means that the other is lacking something, which he gains through the service that's being provided. So therefore, where is that possible? It would seem it's only possible by a servant and a master down below. That the servant can add shleimus, wholesomeness, completeness by the master. Why? For although he is a master of Odin, Amiti, and a real master, meaning to say that he's really in that bracket. Nevertheless, there are matters in which he is lacking, or that are lacking by him.
Who's the he? The servant?
The master. The master. And this is the service of the servant. To fill that which he's lacking, or to complete his desire, his will. In other words, either he's lacking something and he provides the service, or he has a desire for something to happen, and the servant carries that out. In either of those cases, through this, he complements the master. The master without that is lacking, is deficient in some way, and the service of the servant complements that. With an E. Complements with an E. When you move on from this is understood, Gam also. Not only does this add shleimus, wholesomeness, by the master, it also adds wholesomeness by the servant. Why? Because through the provision of the service, he actualizes his mission, his role. So it works both ways in a servant and a master below. However, now let's take that and apply it above. Aval l'mayla, however, above, concerning Hashem. Kivan she'ihu shleimusa dekeilah, since, as it says, it's brought in Kabbalah, Hashem is the wholesomeness of everything, which means to say he's completely whole. He's not lacking anything. Inherently so. So therefore, any movement is not understood. How this concept of service is relevant altogether concerning Hashem. Hashem is not lacking anything. He's totally complete. He's not dependent on anything outside of him. Service denotes inherently, embedded within the idea of service, is that the one that the service is being provided to is lacking something. It would seem that what? That is not possible when we talk about Hashem. So what is the idea of serving Hashem? Very, very basic question. Fundamental question. That's question number one. We also need to understand that concerning this matter of service, of serving Hashem, we find contradictions in the words of our sages. Aside from the fact that we have a fundamental question about the whole concept of serving Hashem, let's see what the sages say about it. So we find contradictions. In some places it says that service is meaningful. In some places it says that serving Hashem is meaningless. Serving a man's service of Hashem is meaningless. Why? So the Rebbe quotes, sometimes we find that this concept of serving Hashem, service, has no makes no difference above. As the Medrash, as is brought to the Medrash. This is a quote from the Medrash. Does Hashem care whether one slaughters from the throat, or one slaughters from the nape? What difference does it make for Hashem how we slaughter an animal? What does he care? So the Medrash says, indeed, for Hashem it doesn't really matter. So why indeed did Hashem give us mitzvahs? So he says, the Medrash says, mitzvahs were only given, they were only given for the purpose of refining Hashem's creatures. That's it. Dahainu. Shekol inyan mitzvahs. This means that the entire concept of mitzvahs, commandments, is only for the purpose of refining creatures, refining human beings. But it really does not matter up above. For Hashem, it doesn't really make a difference whether we shecht this way or we shecht the other way. Whether we perform a mitzvah and if we have a talis katan that has 4 corners or 5 corners. So what's the purpose of these rules? The purpose of these rules is to refine Hashem's creatures. Through creatures fulfilling Hashem's will in a specific way, that refines them. And indeed, this is actually explicit in a verse in Eiv, in Job. If you sin, what do you do to him? If you have abundant misdeeds, abundant sin, what do you do to him? And if you're righteous, what are you giving to him? What are you contributing to him? What's the meaning of this verse? That our actions, so far as Hashem is concerned, are meaningless. That's on the one hand. Well, on the other hand, we find that the man's service of Hashem does have an impact, does make an impression above, does do something. As is brought in another medrash, ala posik on the verse in Chumash, va'ata yigdal nokech adnai. Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, and now may Hashem's strength, power become great. So the medrash says, what does it mean? Hashem's power should become great. It seems to denote that Hashem's power could be weaker or stronger. How does that happen? So the medrash says, shalidei kiyum ha'torah mitzvahs, that through the fulfillment of Torah and Hashem's commandment, Hashem's commandments, mitzvahs, nase inyan da hagdola b'shem adnai. What is brought about is a growth, an expansion in the Hashem's name Adnai, that Hashem's name becomes greater, meaning to say that we do add something in the spiritual sense through our service of Hashem. So this is a direct contradiction to the verse in Eiv, and also to the medrash that we quoted before, that mitzvahs don't make any difference up above. V'chein matzino, so this is in the positive. Do our actions actually make a difference to Hashem, from Hashem's perspective? V'chein matzino, we also find, through the lack of serving Hashem, this brings about a weakening, as it were, above, in Hashem's energy. As the Medrash says on the verse in Chumash, that the rock that has given birth to you, Teshi, becomes weak. What does that mean? The Medrash says that if it's in a time when the Yidden do not fulfill Hashem's will, which means the lacking in the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs, matishim kavyochel, we weaken, as it were, the great strength of Hashem above. So we find contradictions. On the one hand, we see that mitzvahs are meaningful, and they have an impact above. We find on the one hand that what? That mitzvahs, the lack of mitzvahs, cause a weakening of the divine energy above. On the other hand, we find that what? That our service of Hashem is meaningless so far as Hashem is concerned. It's only there for our purposes. So which is it? Does Aveda, what is Avedas Hashem all about? Chapter 2. But the matter is thus. Kimuva b'chasidus, as is brought in Chasidus, Avedas HaKodesh, from a sefer called Avedas HaKodesh, from one of the great Kabbalists. So he says there like this: the Masha Amru Razal, that which our sages say, v'chima ichpas leichulu. What difference does it make to him whether we slaughter an animal from the throat or we slaughter it from the nape? In other words, that our mitzvahs don't make a difference above. Our service of Hashem does not make any difference from Hashem's point of view. This is a reference to who al odin yochid, on the single master, the only master, sheirish hashanashim, the root of all roots. This is actually a quote. This is the language that the Avedas HaKodesh uses. It's an unusual expression. We'll get to that in a minute. The lei leichbes leklal. For him, the single master, the only master, the root of all roots, he doesn't care at all whether we shech the animal from the throat or we shech the animal from the nape. In other words, so far as that level of getlichkeit is concerned, godliness is concerned, our Aveda is indeed, our service is meaningless. The omnam, however, l'tzeirach hakavod, for the purpose of the glory, lahashpia al haroshim ha'elyonim, to bestow the flow of divine energy on the supernal heads, liyachid reish hamachshava b'seifa, to unite the head of the thought to its end, chulu, etc. Tzedach gomur hu, avodas Hashem, serving Hashem, is a total necessity. It's completely necessary. It's an imperative.
So it's why? You just said it's meaningless.
So far as the Odin Yochid Sheirish HaSharoshim, the single, the only master, the root of all roots, he doesn't care. But for the purpose of the glory, to bestow the flow of divine energy on the supernal heads, to unite the beginning of the thought with its end, for that purpose, Avodah is totally and completely necessary, is a vital imperative.
Whose thought? Hashem's thought.
Oh, so now the Rebbe is going to start dissecting it. Who is the Odin Yochid Sheirish HaSharoshim? Which level of godliness are we talking about there? Which level of godliness are the supernal heads? Right? This is unique language. So the Rebbe starts beginning to define this. Behind the Bechinas Odin Yochid Sheirish HaSharoshim. When we say Odin Yochid, it seems almost to be a contradiction in terms. Right? Odin means a master. And as we just mentioned before, as the Rebbe just mentioned, when you say the word master, that denotes that there is a servant. In the relationship between a servant and a master, there are certain things that the master needs and does not do on his own, cannot do on his own, and he needs the servant to provide that service. And in that sense, the servant adds wholesomeness, adds an element, provides a service to the master, which otherwise he would be lacking in. So on the one hand, when you say Odoin, in this context of the expression of David HaKadosh, it means that he needs the service of the servant. At the same time, you say Yochid, the only one, which means what? That he's completely independent, he's on his own. He doesn't need anybody. Right? So immediately you see already that there is this friction between the Odin and the Yochid. But even so far as that level is concerned, he says, and it's also, what do we say? Shoresh HaShoroshim, the root of all roots. What does it mean, the root of all roots? There's the root of something, and then there's the root of the root. What's the relationship between the root of something and that which stems from it? So for example, Chesed, the Atzilis, Chesed of Atzilis, is the root of the sweetness in a physical apple. Could you say that there's any relationship between Chesed of Atzilis, any similarity between Chesed of Atzilis and the sweetness of an apple? No. But nonetheless, it's root. Similarly, when you say Shoresh HaShoroshim, the root of the root, it means you're talking about a level of godliness that is so far removed from the root that stems from the root, much like the spiritual root of physical phenomena. What is the relationship between the root of all roots and the physical phenomena? Infinite. Right? So we're obviously talking about a tremendously high level of Gettlichkeit. And in that level of Gettlichkeit, which is called Odin Yochid Shoresh HaShoroshim, we're going to explain it at length later on. There, Avodah, service, is meaningless, even though we still have to understand why is it called Odin, if service is meaningless, because that denotes that there is a servant, we'll get to that. However, when we talk about Liyachid, Reisha Machshava B'Seifa, we talk about the supernal heads, to unite the beginning of the thought with its end, over there, it's a total imperative. In simple terms, what we're talking about is a level of godliness, on the one hand, the level of godliness, which is totally removed from Seder Shtalshalos, the chain order of creation. That would be Odin Yochid Shoresh HaShoroshim. When we talk over there, Avodah, it would seem, has no relevance, has no bearing, makes no impact. When we talk about a level of Gettlichkeit, which is what? Lashpi al Haroshim al Yonim, to bestow divine energy on the supernal heads. The supernal heads refers to Keser, Chochmah, and Bina. That's already the beginning of Seder Shtalshalos, the beginning of the chain order of creation. In fact, as he's going to explain, the Keser that we're referring to is Arich. It's the external dimension of Keser, which is already the dimension of Keser that relates to the lower. If you remember, we learned in one of the previous Mamorim that in Keser there are two levels. There's the Atik, which relates to which is the Seif, which is the end of the Gettlichkeit aspect, still in the domain of godliness. Arich, the external one, is already Gettlichkeit as it relates to Seder Shtalshalos, right? To the lowers, to the world of creation, of creatures. So you're talking about levels that are already beginning to be associated with Seder Shtalshalos. For that, and Liachad Reisha Machshava B'Seifa, which means to actualize creation, to actualize God's intended purpose of creation, over there, Avodah is necessary. But the Rebbe is going to spell all of this out in particular, in detail, and in Mitzvah Shem, we will continue tomorrow.